Before we begin to talk about the specific facts of what happened this afternoon, and I know many of you have been up at the scene, I ask you to take a moment, both you and the viewers, to think about what it is that actually happened today. And to help do that, I'm going to provide an audio from the scene. Sometimes these situations can seem a bit impersonal. What you just heard was Memorial Drive in Cambridge at 1:30 on Monday afternoon. I would venture to guess that there is no one in this room who hasn't had occasion to travel along that stretch of Memorial Drive, particularly on a beautiful day like today. And to be aware of the traffic, the vehicular traffic, the pedestrian traffic, the traffic on the river. And I ask you to keep that in mind as we describe what it is that took place and the response that we saw on Memorial Drive today. Approximately 1:06 p.m. Today, Cambridge Police received a 911 call from the Boston Police. Boston Police was reporting that there was an individual who later was placed under arrest in this incident, who they believed was in Cambridge, that individual had been observed to be acting erratically, and that they believed the suspect to be in possession of a rifle. Massachusetts State Police began a response to that area on Memorial Drive, as well as Cambridge Police. By the time they were making their arrival, there was already an active shooter situation. That individual was already traveling down the middle of Memorial Drive. Cars were stopped in traffic. He was in the possession of that assault-style rifle that had been described, and he was actively firing in an erratic fashion at various vehicles along the road. In the course of doing that, two males in vehicles separately were struck by gunfire. As the state police were arriving, the trooper who was arriving in his cruiser and a civilian, a former Marine, licensed to carry a firearm, while people were jumping from their cars, scattering in various directions. Remember, they're scattering while people are firing, while this individual is firing erratically. So they don't know where they're going to be safe. When troopers arrived, we discovered some individuals actually under their car, having tried to seek a safe place. The cruiser from which that trooper stepped was himself struck in the front post by a bullet from that gun. Both that trooper and that civilian, rather than going in one direction, went towards the suspect with their weapons to try to end that situation. Both the civilian and the trooper fired their weapons, and that suspect was struck multiple times in the extremities. The suspect was then treated on scene by those same officers who'd been attempting to end the situation. He was transported to a Boston hospital where he is being treated for gunshot wounds to the extremities. Both of those victims from separate cars are in Boston hospitals suffering from life-threatening injuries. That does not begin to address the trauma experienced by everybody who was out there, those individuals on the river, walking, pushing baby carriages, riding by. We know that that weapon had the capacity to have struck people on the other side of that river. There is no reason to suggest that there's any connection between this individual and any of the people who were in any of those cars that were struck. We are very early in this investigation. As you know from being at the scene, they're still processing. That scene stretches over a very long space along Memorial Drive. But we do know this, that a very high number of rounds, in the neighborhood of 50 to 60, were fired in a very short period of time. This incident lasted minutes, thanks to the actions of the trooper and that civilian. This incident occurred, as I said, in a very busy part of the afternoon with lots of people there. Clearly, people's lives were put at risk. The individual who was traveling along with that weapon, who fired those shots, an individual named Tyler Brown. Mr. Brown is in custody at the hospital. He's going to be charged with 2 counts of armed assault with intent to murder, possession charges with respect to the weapon, as well as a variety of other charges as we unfold what took place exactly, and we have a chance to speak to the many, many people who were out there. This, in the city of Cambridge, a relatively safe and certainly a vibrant community where people live, work, and travel through, what happened today cannot stand. And it is also important to recognize that this risk that's created by this firing of a gun, where people are nearby, is the subject of a bill that has been filed for the past 4 sessions to create an offense to punish a shooter who acts, as I would suggest to you was the case today, without regard for the risk of seriously bodily injury to another, but who shoots intentionally or recklessly and hereby causes a substantial risk of serious bodily injury. That is a bill we filed for the last 4 sessions. It has not been passed. We will be refiling that bill again this session because that is the legislation that we need to address this kind of situation. We are asking 2 things at this point, both if there are individuals who may live in that area or may have been perhaps on a boat in another car. We know that some cars turned around in an attempt to go the other way and get away from the situation, that if they have any video, they contact the Massachusetts State Police to turn over that video. As well, individuals involved in today's incident have asked that their privacy be respected as they attempt to deal with the trauma from what happened.